today on Ramblings with Rebecca, second generation rights. We may recall from yesterday, assuming that we watched yesterday's episode on first generation rights, that this week in our series around human rights and international law, we're first exploring a constructed categorization. That's a weird word. Sorry. A constructed system of separating and understanding and classifying rights in 3 generations based on the 3 buzzwords of the French Revolution: liberty, equality, and fraternity. Today we are on generation number 2, equality. Second generation human rights related to equality begin to be recognized along with first generations, for the first generation of rights by governments after World War II. So this is happening at the same time as far as when they're emerging. So it's not that first generation happens and then 20 years later, like a human generation, there's this baby. Rather, it refers to kind of a hierarchy of attention paid. Second generation rights are primarily economic, social, and cultural in nature, focused on making sure that everyone is treated the same in society, but also is able to live in some kind of equal condition and treatments. So they would consider things like the right to be employed, housing, healthcare, social security, unemployment benefits. These are fundamentally different, some could argue, than first generation rights in a number of ways. Here, instead of the state being the big evil state that the individual needs to be protected from, as they are in first generation rights, second generation rights sees the state as something that can give something to individuals, and with the language of rights, is in fact entitled to give something to individuals. These second generation rights again appear in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, particularly in Articles 22 to 27, and later appear in a binding treaty, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the ICESCR. We may recall from yesterday the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Both of these covenants actually come about at the same time, in that they are adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1966, and they come into force when enough parties ratify them. Both of those happen in 1976. The International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights is now a binding treaty for, of course, those states that have signed up to be bound by it, but creates yet another system through which individuals can in fact see some enforcement of this second generation of rights. Back to a little bit of the distinction between first and second generation. We mentioned yesterday that first generation, generally speaking, involves a negative duty from the state to abstain from doing something, to abstain from torture, or to abstain from arbitrary killing, or to abstain from impeding someone's freedom to speech, that kind of thing. Second generation rights, for the most part, require states to do something, to actively help provide or facilitate. And as such, they tend to be tied to more monetary issues than first generation. Second generation human rights are likely to cost something in order to be realized, and are less kind of resource dependent. In the international legal system, there's a recognition of this, and this is part of why we have this classification and distinction between first and second generation rights, in that most first generation rights are fairly absolute. States are doing them or they're not. If they're not doing them, or if they're somehow impeding any of those rights, they are in trouble. Second generation rights, on the other hand, a lot of the legal obligation is caught up in language about the progressive realization, according to a state's resources and this kind of thing. Trying to recognize that not all states have the funding to give everyone housing, that kind of thing. So there's this recognition, including from the legal community, that rights that come with money qualifications attached are not going to be realized overnight. Of course, this makes it much more difficult to figure out in a court whether or not a right is being violated. Does the right to housing mean that if I don't have a house, I am absolutely missing a human right and I can sue my state? Or is it more of a procedural obligation? The state has to put some mechanism in place for me to be able to appeal that and try and get at housing and that kind of thing. So we see quite a distinction between first and generation as far as how states are held accountable.